Armchair commanders, we call the shots. From our living room thrones where the action's hot. We're the generals of fiction, the masters of war. In silver screen battles with buttered popcorn. Armchair commanders, armchair commanders.
All right, welcome to the Armchair Commanders podcast. My name is John.
And I'm Jack.
And this week we are fortunate enough to be joined by Mel from social media pages better known as the 350 Girls. Mel, if you'd like to say hi and tell the folks a little bit about yourself.
Yes. So my name is Mel. I run the 350 Girls. We have an Instagram page and we're on social media, but we're also we run a travel exhibit and do a lot of living history and presentations. That is because when I was in the Air Force for about 3.5 years, there was nothing about women's military history. And I got told that if I cared about women's military history, that I was going to have to teach it. So I started 350 Girls about 2.5 years ago to combat that absence of women's military history. And we've gone to do all kinds of really cool events like, on this podcast. We got to go to the Air Force Ball and talk about the Women's Air Force. So it's been an incredible journey over the last couple years getting to teach this history that had just not been available when I was in the military.
So we've followed you for a while, and I know you hit a lot on World War II. Do you venture outside of World War II much, or is that just your kind of your primary focus?
We focus a lot on World War II because that is where things really changed and cemented women's military service. But we have covered World War I a little bit. We do a little bit of Korea and Vietnam. We're starting to collect uniforms now from Vietnam veterans. We have some from the Korean War. But we found that a lot of the veterans who served in Korea are just not ready to talk about it.
Right.
And that tracks with a lot of what we've learned with World War II as well, is that it takes some time and women really aren't encouraged to talk about their military service. A lot of veterans don't, but women especially. So we're slowly getting into post-World War II, and we are talking a little bit about World War I with the Hello Girls Congressional Gold Medal going through. So we are getting some opportunities now to expand into other time periods. But we do primarily talk about World War II.
Okay. So kind of getting into our main topic of the evening, we're discussing Netflix's recent release. It's only been out maybe a month at this point. The 6
tomorrow.
So what was your first kind of thought or reaction when you heard that this movie was coming out?
So they've been talking about it for a few years now. So we've known it was coming, and then out of nowhere, they announced that it was getting released in December. So it was after kind of hearing about it, we finally got to see the trailer, and that was super exciting because that's the first time we've seen women in uniform be the focus of a major film production. There's a couple of women in the background in Band of Brothers. Obviously, you've got Lean on the Pacific, but there's not any mass media out there that the story is entirely about the women. So to see that come to small screen, it was Netflix, but seeing that in a movie trailer and seeing that all those uniforms, and it was really incredible getting to see that for the first time.
Yeah, I think really outside of this, the only thing I'm familiar with that's women-centric to the story of their participation in World War II is films that were produced during the war, which really isn't the same as big budget Hollywood films.
No, you've got Keep Your Powder Dry, which is about the Women's Army Corps. We actually consider that a primary source because the Army consulted on it. So the Army was making sure that the uniforms and the military, all that stuff was correct. There was a musical called The Tars and Spars about the women of the Coast Guard. But in recent times, we pretty much, in terms of representation, get Lena Riggi from the Pacific. Well, she was a real Marine, but that's really the only mass-produced story we have featuring the women in World War II.
So you guys, I'm trying to remember. You guys held like a screening event for this movie, correct?
We did, and we actually ended up teaming up with a couple of other organizations in our community. When originally we had planned to do a small screening at our local senior center, and we ended up with the senior center because so many places told us they didn't want to host it because Netflix has apparently a bad habit of suing people for showing films that are only available on Netflix. So I originally planned to do it at the senior center and kind of take the risk that Netflix wouldn't sue us because it was a free screening, it was an educational event, and we weren't soliciting donations. But then I ended up getting in touch with someone at Netflix. I went through the film studio who sent me to the legal team at Netflix, who after almost 6 weeks of me calling them every week and asking them to send me guidelines on how not to get sued, they finally did get back to me and say, hey, as long as you don't use films, like stills from the film, and you don't use the Netflix logo, and it's free and it's educational, we likely won't sue you. So from that point, once that became
good, likely is
likely, I mean, it was good enough that the VA and the executive office decided they wanted to be a part of the screening because they were like, you know what, those odds are good enough for us.
I think that would play out well in court, where it's like, well, they said they probably wouldn't if we did this, so
yeah, they couldn't give us any guarantee. They couldn't give us permission. We had to be like, Netflix did not endorse this at all. But what I told them, I was like, you guys are the only ones who have this film. It's being released in a couple of theaters, but you are taking a story about a minority within a minority, and you're telling me that we cannot share it with the community. Like, do you really want to go on record as having gatekept this film?
yeah, that'd be you definitely win the PR battle on that one.
Exactly. It was kind of frustrating when it seemed like they weren't going to encourage this, and it was like so many people want to see this film and so many people need to see this film.
So how well did that event go for you? Was it like well attended, or?
We got a blizzard that night.
Oh.
Which was frustrating. I mean, we had about 50 people. We ended up having 5 host locations, and we had about 50 people across the state. We had 25 at the location we hosted, but we originally had so many more people RSVP'd for it, and then the weather just did not cooperate.
Not a lot you can do with that. So kind of getting into the film now, my wonderful co-host Jack, what did you think?
So I didn't know much about this movie. I had heard of it and I knew who it was about, but I didn't know this movie was directed by Tyler Perry. And when I saw it directed by Tyler Perry at the beginning, I called him like, "You son of a bitch, did you trick me into watching a Tyler Perry movie?"
We heard our fair share of Medea goes to war jokes. Like when people heard who was directing it, I don't think a lot of people took it seriously at first.
I mean I think that's kind of the issue. Like, here's the thing, like I don't want to like bash on Tyler Perry, but it's a little difficult not to, because he is in the same vein as like, I consider him in the same vein as like Seth MacFarlane when it comes to filmmaking, where it's low budget, kind of low effort or lowbrow type of media. Like, there's nothing wrong with the fact that he makes films that he enjoys making. Like, don't we all wish to make a good chunk of money at the things we're passionate about? I mean, there's no hate there. It's just Tyler Perry is not known as like a world-renowned filmmaker by any stretch of the imagination.
It was a surprising combination. Like, this is such an important story that needs to be told, and it's been getting traction over the last about 8 years now, where they got the Congressional Gold Medal. They're starting to, but it was kind of surprising that this film and this story ended up being saying that Tyler Perry was in charge of, and that at the same time we're so grateful to him for producing this film and bringing this history forward. But a lot of people have been like, Tyler Perry was in, really? How did
I
he end
think
up involved in this?
like I get it, and I'm saying this as a pasty white dude. I get that they chose a director to they chose an African American director to direct a film that is a part of African American history. I totally get that because there are cultural aspects of African American history that he better understands than any number of other directors. That being said, there are a great number of other African American directors that they could have gone with that I'm not sure, like, because it's one of those like Monday morning quarterback things, but I feel like who knows if you gave this film to like Jordan Peele, for example, who has done Oscar nominated material, like what kind of product he would have produced with this.
And that's a question we actually talked about. We had a discussion about a week ago, and because we had so many people that were emailing us and commenting, and we had someone be like, is Tyler Perry taken away from the credibility of this film? And I don't think so, but I also think that there needed to be a lot more, like in the press, there needed to be a lot more like history being told, because it's not like Normandy where someone can just Google, the 688 or, look this history up and get, 50 documentaries. But I don't think it hurt it, but I think they could have done more to promote it as a serious film.
Right. Well, it's like Jack mentioned earlier. Like he saw Tyler Perry on the cue card, and he calls me immediately.
Yeah.
And when I watched this film, you know, I thought the first maybe 10 minutes of this film was kind of rough. Like it was very corny, very cheesy, like a little over the top, if you will. Um, but it is a film that I genuinely believe got better throughout, and I did enjoy this film, and I think the quality does increase. But like this movie does kind of have a rough start to it, and I had to tell Jack, I'm like, you just gotta bear with it. You gotta make it through the first 10 minutes, and then like this movie's going to pick up some steam, and you're going to get into it.
Now,
And
had you guys heard of the 688 before this came out? I know you're supposed to be asking questions, but had you guys heard of the 688?
no, I had not heard of this. I'm familiar with just being generally a history nerd and having a degree in history. Like I'm familiar with like post during wartime and like V cars and all that kind of stuff. But I wasn't familiar with this story specifically. And I think that's something I'd like to credit this film with is A, it talks about a section of history that would be forgotten, and B, I learned about new people. Like, for example, growing up, like when you think about learning about World War II or like the 40s in like high school history, if you will, or even in college history sometimes, you talk about FDR and it's always like pulling us out of the Great Depression and leading us through World War II, this, that, and the other. But like, I never heard of the Black Cabinet before this film. I had to pause the movie and Google it and be like, holy shit, FDR was way more progressive than I knew he was a progressive president to begin with, but like the fact that he surrounded himself with other prominent African American leaders of his time, like, was not something I was aware of, and I think is really kind of something that should be hit on more in his presentation in films.
And I think it was really amazing that they included Mary McLeod Bethune in this, which is a name that is synonymous with the Women's Army Corps. And it's incredible because they featured some amazing women in this film. And we had Eleanor Roosevelt, we have Mary McLeod Bethune, we've got Charity Adams. And that is, there's a lot of other women that were involved in the Women's Army Corps. Like we don't have Edith Norris Rogers, who we've been doing a lot of um, talking about on our page recently. She's a Massachusetts stateswoman who created the Women's Army Corps. We don't have Ovetta Kalpabbi, who was the director. But what's really important to know about Mary McLeod Bethune and why it's so important she was in the film is that she was responsible for making sure that the Women's Army Corps was open to African American women. And what's incredible about what was going on with the Women's Army Corps is that the Navy did not desegregate for, what's another 3 years, and the Marine Corps didn't allow African American women to serve until 1949. So what's cool about this film, and I'm hoping that people Google Mary McLeod Bethune and realize how much she fought for these women to have a place in the WAC. It's tough because they were only allowed to make up 10% of the total number. So when Charity Adams came in, she was handpicked, and she was one of the first 40. So if you have 400 women in the WAC, you can only have 40. So they were limited. And she made sure that she was responsible for developing those guidelines for bringing them in. But the film mentioning her was just, I thought that was really incredible, because she doesn't get mentioned a lot, even in relation to WAC history.
I will say, not knowing about her or that, her place in the cabinet, was a point for me to Google her. But also, like, besides having her be in the room with FDR, the fact that she was played by Oprah Winfrey was another one of those, like, I have to pause the movie and be like, okay, who is this person that they felt necessary to have Oprah Winfrey play? Like, because, that wasn't like, Oprah Winfrey isn't going to do just some bit part or some unimportant, character in a story.
No, this was an incredibly influential person. And, she was, if it wasn't for her, it would have been very easy for the women's roles in World War II just to be open to white women. And that was kind of the approach you had with the Navy and the Marine Corps, is that this was a big opportunity for women to serve their country, but it was not going to be an equal opportunity. So what the WAC was doing was really groundbreaking and twice over. Because if they had said, we're not going to include African American women, with the politics and the social culture at the time, nobody would have questioned it. But they fought to include them and fought to give them a place and give them a chance to serve. And that's really incredible.
So, Jack, was I accurate when I told you just had to wait 10 minutes, or what? What do you think?
I mean, it got a little better.
Okay.
Abram had, I think, the most predictable death I've ever seen. In fact, have either of you two seen Black Dynamite?
I have not.
There's
I'm
a
familiar
scene.
with it, but
There's a scene where they're infiltrating one of the big bad's bases, and just some nameless background characters walking next to the main character, and he said, "Oh man, after this mission, this is my last mission. This is my retirement. I can't wait to go home to my wife and 3 children." And like, he's hitting every cliche. He even shows him like a locket of his wife, and then a spear just comes out of nowhere and kills him instantly. And the main character said, "Who saw that coming? I mean, who saw where that came from?" And like, fucking Abram.
I don't know. It took me a moment, because, like, I'm not sure if I've really seen this in a film that we've reviewed yet, where they show a character dying and then it's a backtrack, and they show like they show you a character death and then they backtrack and then you develop a relationship with the character and then they re-kill him again. So
Yeah,
you experience the death twice. So,
Well, it doesn't seem to make sense at first, because, like, we don't know it's him. So all we see is just like this plane going down, and we're not really sure yet how it connects to the story.
not to mention, there's like that opening battle scene. There is so much going on. Like, it is a busy scene, and also, like, again, this kind of goes with like the directorial choice. Like, there are moments where like an explosion happens and then you see like a couple of guys like very obviously like yanked up by, like guide wires like 12 feet up into the air. And I feel like that was just a little distracting. Not to mention like a fighter plane crashing in the middle of a battlefield right as a charge is happening is kind of odd, but
I feel like, and it's funny because like we get one of the other things we've heard from people is that the Jeeps are wrong, and it was like for it shouldn't be so distracting and it shouldn't be so important, but like you can tell that this movie like it was definitely like designed and marketed to such a diverse audience. And it's funny because I've talked to people who have no, military history and thought the movie was great. And on the other hand, I'll talk to someone who's like an expert on like World War II planes, and they are listing all the ways that opening scene was wrong. And it's kind of funny just hearing it from both ends of the spectrum. And I don't pretend to know a whole lot about, planes and battle tactics, but I've heard from some folks about like some of the like I guess the planes that they mentioned in that scene at the end where they were getting bombed. Somebody was
No.
like, "Those planes were never in England at that point during the war," and I'm like, "I'm going to trust you on this." When I was busy looking at the uniforms.
See, for us, we usually don't get too pedantic about that kind of stuff. Like it has to be really egregious.
Mhm.
Like take us out of the experience.
Like you know how in the movie Patton they use Vietnam era tanks as substitute for German tanks. Like I would consider that to be an egregious kind of scenario. But um there was one part early on in the film that had nothing to do with the military that really took me out of it. Like this is African American experience film during World War II, and they very much hit on the racism aspects of this film. And I was expecting that, and I thought they did that well. But the thing that confused the ever loving shit out of me was so our main character, Lena, is originally from Philadelphia, so a more northern state, but still south enough that like it racism was going to be more prevalent there than like north, if you will. And they show one of the earliest scenes is she's coming out of school and she meets Abram, who's got his jalopy parked out front. And I don't know if you notice this because later on they show her in the classroom, but Lena is in an integrated school, but it's
Mhm.
all women's school. So somehow Tyler Perry was able to get the fact that the Philadelphia school district was segregated by sex correct, but wasn't able to get the fact that the Philadelphia school district was still segregated by race at that point. And for me, that was a distracting thing. And I know it's like a small thing, but it was genuinely confusing for me. Because it's like
Right.
you're hitting on all these racism aspects that you should, but you fail to show a segregated school.
We got asked quite a bit too about her relationship if she would have been allowed to date someone white at this time in American history. And this character that she was involved in is fictional. Um, but I've learned recently that the character that she was based on the real life veteran who apparently had a chance to consult in the film and was apparently very involved in writing her own characters. So I'm not entirely sure if maybe she said things and Tyler Perry didn't.
So, brief little technical issue. You were mentioning how the character Lena, the actual veteran, was able to consult on this.
Exactly. So I'm guessing, if there were that her character, she probably had quite a bit of say in it. So, there's some things that may not make sense. And obviously, I'm like you called pasty white guy, but this is looking at it from my perspective. I can't say for certain what that experience would have been like in Philadelphia at that time. But if they were, she was able to contribute to the film, maybe that was maybe that was something they learned from her. But it definitely does seem to go against what we know of the history at that time. And I can see that being kind of distracting. But
And like, by no means do I know the policies of every single school in Philadelphia in 1942, but generally speaking, it just did not seem to add up for me.
no, I can see that.
But so we've kind of gone over the beginning of this film. What did you think of when our characters actually transition to starting the like military experience, because we kind of get this very stereotypical war movie boot camp scene. And does that add up with the wax experience, or
I
is
mean,
that
yes and no. There's one of the things I've had a really amazing opportunity to actually talk to some of the family members over the last couple months, and one of the things they all bring up is that they don't like that the film does not show that they were selected for the 6 888. This kind of looks like these girls just joined at the right time and they got into the 6 888 just because of timing and circumstances. And the 6 888 was actually handpicked. They were selected for this elite assignment, and they also got additional training. So, in terms of like accuracy of the showing them going through just basic training and then off to England, from my research and my understanding and what I've heard from the family members, that might be like the biggest sticking point for a lot of people, because there was a lot of pride in being selected for the 6 888 and just showing that they, pipeline of boot camp, England. It does not really pay an effective tribute to the fact that these women were selected for what was considered an incredibly high stakes, high visibility assignment. I mean, the WAC training itself was, pretty close. They always love a PT scene. I've noticed that. The PT uniform is a nice touch. They got that correct. But
that seems like a miserable uniform to do PT in.
I have tried it. It is terrible. You've got these
Imagine.
bloomer things, and you're supposed to keep your cover under your head somehow.
We what might be fun is, so we've recently been delving into expanding what we do to just beyond the movie podcast. We also have a YouTube channel for our listeners at home. Go ahead and follow that if you like. But like, we have a trip coming up this year where we're planning on going to Toccoa, Georgia, to visit the training site of the 506 Parachute Regiment. But I also have, I'm debating between, I have the week of 4th of July off this year, like the whole week, which never happens for me. And we're debating, me and my wife, on whether or not to go to Philadelphia or Boston. But we've been discussing these like travel vlog kind of ideas, but I would love to do a PT session with you, and I will even put on the silly.
If you're willing to wear the bloomers,
I will wear bloomers.
It is a vibe, and it's funny because we actually have an example of the training manual.
I'm comfortable enough with my masculinity to put on some bloomers to try a wax PT session.
Let me tell you, I'm dating a Marine, and I've seen things. The silkies they wear, I mean, they cannot make fun of us in our bloomers.
But those are comfy.
I think bloomers are probably the equivalent of the silkies in the 1940s. They look ridiculous, but no, it's going back to like the basic PT scene though. It's kind of funny because they're doing their jumping jacks and they're crawling under the wire and all this stuff. And it's like, you're right, it is kind of the typical. And actually, I'm sure we could find an obstacle course if you want to try running that one in a skirt.
I can do that. I've also been looking for a reason to bust out my tactical kilt, so.
I feel like we can make a day of that. That would be fun. I'm sure we can find somewhere. Actually, the place you want to go if you want to run an obstacle course is the SEAL Museum in Jupiter Beach, which is where they train for the D-Day landing. They actually have the World War II obstacle course.
And where's that? Where's
Jupiter Beach in Florida? So if you go there, pack your coat.
I will definitely. Jack, we gotta add a item to our itinerary.
Damn right we do.
No, I mean the basic training scene. It was, and I'm a veteran, obviously, so like one thing that's weird for me and kind of my sticking point is the lack of military infrastructure, or not infrastructure, but like organization. And one thing I thought was interesting is that throughout the film, you only ever see like Charity Adams or her captain, running the entire battalion.
Right.
And you never see any kind of like NCOs, you never see any, companies or platoons or squads. You only ever see them like moving as a battalion.
Yeah, like there's two people directly in charge of 850 people.
Yes.
Well,
So
it's like when Lena, like, quote unquote, like cracks the code for deciphering how to better sort the mail, because like she figures out that all these soldiers are stamping their letters with like their division icon. And you know Major Adams is like, you did a really good job. I'm like, that sounds like something you'd get like a commendation medal, or like at least promote her from like private to corporal because she showed like excellent work. Like, that seemed like a very World War II type thing to do, and like that's missing.
well, and it's funny when you see her disciplining her like directly, because in the military she would have obviously a couple of people over her who, if Lena wound up on their radar first, then it would go. Or on the alternate, captain would then yell at the people below her to get their private. So it was really weird seeing that there was like this entire tier of military leadership that was just missing. So I'm like trying to watch these scenes where she's getting in her face as the major, and I'm like, where's your NCOs? Where's your sergeants? Like, where's your chain of command? And it's just, that's like one of the things that stood out to me the most throughout the film, which is that lack of military structure.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things like if we were to compare this to like say Band of Brothers, like you take the character of Colonel Sink, we don't see him until he's reassigning, one of his lieutenants. Like, and that's a higher order of operation than, chewing out a private.
Yeah, they would have barely seen her. I mean, they would have been dealing with their sergeants and their company on a regular basis. So the idea that they were getting their orders straight from the top and everything, it was kind of talk about like breaking that that movie magic for you. Every time like she came over and gave someone directions instead of it going through the sergeants and then down to the private, that kind of broke it for me a few times.
So I know that's an aspect of this film that you don't particularly care for. What would you say is your least favorite, or what do you think is probably the worst part of this film?
I really think it is the fact that they did not depict them as disciplined, well trained members of the military. Like I said, they were handpicked for this mission. And the other scene that really like threw me was the scene with the USB, where they ignored orders. And these are two fictional characters; these are two deaths that never happened. But you keep seeing so what we do at 350 is we are really important about. We are very much into making sure that these women are remembered as veterans. They're remembered for their military bearing, their dedication to duty. And I feel like the movie really struggled sometimes to show that. So I love the idea of the movie overall, but there are times when they would show them behaving in ways that would have been considered unacceptable, that may have completely, ruined and undermined that pressure, they had on them to be exemplary. They had a lot to prove, and I'm not entirely sure that the movie showed that.
That definitely seemed like a scene that was put in there for the sake of, high intention or a little bit of action, because it's like, it's a World War II movie. We obviously need an explosion. Like,
actually, I'll tell you, if we're going to talk about like one thing about that scene, sorry, I'm kind of ranting now, but like the scene where they're showing them collecting their funds for their funeral in a helmet. Now, the big difference with them being the Women's Army Corps versus when they were the Army Auxiliary Corps, originally they didn't have overseas pay or government life insurance. The point of them becoming the Women's Army Corps, which they were at the time of this film, is they had government life insurance and they had overseas pay. So it undermined that they even had these benefits by showing them collecting funds for their burial. That could have been a really cool opportunity to be like, hey, even the women, they were soldiers enough to get in the military area. So I thought that was kind of a detriment to these women's legacy.
I think so. That kind of goes into like the whole funeral scene of it, which I did appreciate the funeral scene, and I appreciate the follow up where, like, as far as a movie goes, like Lena being able to see Abram's grave, like, is a very powerful moment, very moving. And I thought it was good for the purpose of the film. But also, if we recall, the beginning of this movie said Italy.
Yes.
They're in England.
I hate repatriated. I mean, if they're going to repatriate his body, why would they send him to England and not the United States? Like, why not send him home?
I'm just the logic doesn't logic there. I thought it was a great and powerful scene, but the shit don't make sense.
There is an American cemetery in Italy. There's a good chance he would have been there.
Jack, what'd you think
About this movie in general or this scene?
that scene?
Then
you can tell me what your least favorite part of the film was.
I don't know, man. I just got lost at that point. I was just the UXB scene. That scene literally started with a close up on an unexploded ordnance, so I knew what was coming. Like, and the scene where she's like, you know what, fuck orders. Let's just go around. We don't have time for this. I'm like, there's a reason you follow the itinerary, but I just don't know.
Because like waiting an hour or two is really going to impact your flow of work.
What? You got 6 months to do this shit. There's no hurry.
Yeah, you have like dozens of hangers worth of mail. Your one truckload being an hour too late is not going to make a huge difference in the grand scheme of things.
But I think I'd like to take a moment to mention something that the main character of this movie, Lena Derricott Bell King, right?
Yes.
Turns out she died literally yesterday.
Wait, what? Yesterday?
Yes, like January 18th. Oh, wait, no, last year. Sorry, I read the year wrong. A year ago.
I was going to say, what kind of timing is that?
See, I'm doing it. 2024, 2020.
Talk to her. They did get to talk to her.
Yeah, I saw that.
I saw the film apparently, but yeah, she never saw the release, but she did see the film apparently.
I see. And apparently, Hugh, the guy she meets and later marries, they were married before she shipped out. That's one detail they changed because I guess Tyler Perry just had to have the romantic subplot in.
Well, I mean,
it's a choice.
He takes certain liberties in this film that I honestly don't care that much about. I think there's more egregious errors in this film than him moving when when she meets her husband. It's kind of like talking, like we did a review of the Bastogne episode with the grandson of Doc Rowe, who is the main prominent character of that episode. And he's like, yeah, as far as I know, my grandpappy never, canoodled with a French nurse. Like, but for the sake of that story, it worked, and their family doesn't care about it that much. So, I mean, unless the family takes issue with it, I don't see a reason why, honestly, I should.
There's a chance she probably knew about it and okayed it. So.
Jack, do you remember my freshman year roommate?
Edrin?
Yes, Everin.
Yeah. I do.
I just remember this, but I was like, I actually wrote like a note to myself on my phone because I had to bring this up. So me and Jack went to college together, and my freshman year, I had a roommate. His name was Ebrin, and he was a theater major, like very big in performing arts. He got a master's of Fine Arts, he has gone on to perform in Broadway musicals like Hamilton and stuff. Um, like he's led a
I
very good
ooh,
career.
ooh. He has a Christmas single out too, and it's on my phone. I
He
listen to it
does
every
have a Christmas
Christmas.
single out.
Now, is it good? Your mileage may vary.
Hey, everybody's got to experiment with their different arts, you know.
Yeah, I shouldn't throw stones. I don't have a song out on Apple, but I do have
And
a
that
podcast,
is
I
right.
guess.
You don't have a song out, but you do have a moderately successful podcast. So how's that?
Aha! Eat it, Everett.
We don't make
bag,
money on it, but
bag of shit.
anyways, Ebrin, if you didn't catch it from the fact that he performed in Hamilton, uh, he is African American. Um, he is a nice dude, and I got along with him very well. But what I found to be hilarious is like, and I'm a terrible person. I came back to our dorm room one day, and when I like opened the door, it was kind of like one of those moments where he like was startled that I came home and very obviously like quick like hid something, like he just shoved something under our bed because we had like a bunk bed system, and he shoves this thing under the bed and he's like, "What's up, man?" I'm like, "Not much, just came back to grab. I forgot something. Came back to grab something and I left." But it kind of nagged at me a little bit. So I came like when I came back later that evening, he wasn't there. I'm like, what doesn't he want me to know is in here? So like I did a little digging, which I know is an invasion of privacy, but sue me.
Fuck it.
Nope.
There's no privacy in the USD dorm rooms, let's be honest.
There is very little privacy there. And I pull it out, and so here's this guy who is working on his Masters of Fine Arts, is like a very good performer, is a legitimate artist, and I pull out this tote and I opened it, and it is his secret cache of Tyler Perry DVDs. Like he was a huge Tyler Perry fan and he loved watching his films, but he was ashamed because of his station in life as like an artiste that he's like, I can't let people know I like this stuff. Very
Man,
much reminded me of like a teenage boy hiding a Playboy kind of moment.
I was gonna say, like, finding the Playboy might be a little less shameful. Like, I would gladly give up my porn stash rather than the Tyler Perry stash.
But I think because of that very reaction, I think it's kind of speaks volumes as to what we discussed earlier, which is the credibility of the film people have going into it.
It really is tough because I think that this had the potential, you know, one, especially with it being like the first. You know, are people going to take women's history seriously enough after seeing this film to be like, okay, next time we're going to do Lena Riggi and actually get her in a really correct uniform? Plot twist, she's wearing an army uniform in several scenes specific. Talk about things that break a scene for people. Seeing that she was in an army uniform, anyway. You know, this is the first, so I think there was a lot of pressure and a lot of expectations on this film, and I think there was so many little like liberties that Tyler Perry took that, you know, it's hard not to wonder, like, is this going to impact, you know, telling women's stories going forward? And that's why we've been, you know, so busy the last couple of months, you know, dealing with like these questions and making sure that we are taking advantage of this opportunity to talk about this history and take advantage of this opportunity and use it as a springboard. Like, I know a lot of reenactors who got into reenacting because they saw Saving Private Ryan or Band of Brothers, and, you know, for obvious reasons, there's less opportunities to reenact the 688 than there is the Airborne. But, you know, I am hoping this starts, you know, getting people talking about this unit, getting people talking about this history. That's what we've been doing, trying to take away from this film, is that we have this incredible opportunity where people who have never heard of the WAC, let alone the 688, are now Googling these things and looking for answers. So I'm hoping that all those little goofs don't take away from that.
I think that positive impact is already being seen because, like, For example, we have an individual who's a recurring guest here who has his own podcast that focuses more on kind of like naval history and naval museums. His name's Ken, and he runs a channel called the History X channel. And about a week ago, he came out with like a half hour long video on his channel about the 6 AAA, and it's very documentary formatted, where it's heavy on showing interviews with members of this unit. It's a great video. I highly suggest checking it out, but it already has 250,000 views. So even though there's a limited amount of information, this movie has already spurned a lot of content creators, like including us, doing this review to
Right.
discuss this and to bring this topic more to the forefront. So I definitely say that's a positive aspect of this film, regardless of quality or storytelling or any of these other things.
And that's why we've been trying so hard not to be critical of it. I mean, we are big on uniform standards. We're big on, enforcing that, women were veterans and they held the standard. I have actually been very well behaved and not commented on the uniforms once since the film came out.
I'm so proud of you. That must have taken restraint.
I've been doing a really good job on. I made one comment, which is scene in the beginning where they're talking about how their uniforms don't fit because they're colored. And the costume director wrote an article about how these uniforms don't fit because, white women are a size 0 and African American women are curvy and have beautiful, bigger bodies. And this is actually a myth we've been fighting over on our page, is dealing with people who have this this idea that there's a, World War II body. And Charity Adams actually wrote in her book that the fit issues for the uniforms were for both white women in the military and for the African American. And she also mentioned tailors. So this idea that they were like,
Well, it's not like the army with mass. It's not like the army prior to that was really mass producing women's body type uniforms.
no, and those fit. Sorry, there's a cat.
Kitty.
Kitty.
She likes to hang out. She's actually been sitting here listening to me. But yeah, and it was like, that was one of those things where I'm like, that was the only thing I responded to, because like it's so important, because that otherwise obstructs how awful the uniforms were for everybody. We're actually doing an event soon about the first uniforms, and it was like a men's shirt, a skirt that who knows where they got the pattern from, and basically like any boots they could get. So when they were like, well, they got crappy uniforms because it was an act of racism, that was the only time I pushed back and went, that was an issue across the entire army for women. And that actually set up the Navy for success, because they had an American fashion designer make the Navy uniform. And so the wax uniform issues were so well known that the Navy was able to say, don't join the Army, join the Navy, you won't look like crap.
It is a sales pitch. I mean, aren't there a number of people who join the Marine Corps because they have the best uniforms?
Absolutely. Actually, we had a chance to interview a 100-year-old Marine who told us that was exactly why she joined the Marine Corps. The Marines were not a thing until February of 1943, and in all of 1942, and you see this back and forth between like who has the best uniforms, and it comes out in the social column. Like they're going out there and polling women and being like, which would you join, the Navy or the Army, based on the uniform. So that's the only comment that I have made about the uniforms so far, and I'm very proud of myself, because I'm like, it's Hollywood. I didn't have high expectations. I'm just gonna leave it at that.
I found it interesting because early on you mentioned the scene where they're like, these uniforms are not built for our body types. And then like an hour later we get the like stereotypical 1940s. We're in 1940, so we have to show a swing dancing scene. And that's something else about this film, is that it hits a lot of 1940 film kind of cliches, and that's one of them. But the first person they showed dancing, and they mentioned she was, I forgot what it was, but basically like a professional dancer somewhere. But she's doing like these hardcore, extreme, like out of your mind dance moves that I would never in a million years imagine myself or anyone I know being capable of doing. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, no wonder everybody in the 40s is skinny if they can all dance like that. Like,
So when you come up here and we get you in a skirt, we'll try some of the dancers.
okay. I
That'll be
need
your
I
plan.
need to learn how to swing dance because here in Denver, I don't know if it was a thing when you were here, but over in Boulder,
1940s ball.
that's right. I
Mhm.
I have not had the chance to go, but I'm very like well aware of it, and I want to go at some point. But obviously, going to the 1940s ball and not knowing how to swing dance is a little bit of a hindrance.
They give lessons, but I think you're right about like the swing dance. It does feel like they had a lot of the 1940s tropes. So they have the basic, basic training scene. We've got the swing dance scene. You've got the funeral scene. Um, the dramatic, like, oh, there's been bad news, like, oh, there's been a casualty. Um, and it does definitely hit a lot of those boxes. And it was kind of, I guess, disappointing in a way because with covering a whole new subject and talking about women, I think they could have done something really cool. But I also get the sense that they feel like women's work is not exciting enough. Like we deal with this a lot where people are always trying to pad our events with like what the men were doing or with like fun parts. And it's like it feels like women's roles in World War II, people don't trust that they are interesting enough to make up a film or make up an event on its own. So we are always getting told like, oh, we'll invite, the male reenactors, or can you talk about this? And it's like, why is it not enough for us to talk about the work they were doing? Why do we have to put in all these extra scenes and the love interest? I know it's not a documentary, it's Hollywood, but it's like, why do we have to pack this movie with so much unnecessary stuff that kind of distracts from some of the amazing? So that's kind of
Right.
typical.
Like
That's what our experience
like
has
them accomplishing their task as well as dealing with overcoming the prejudices against them should be a good enough story in of itself.
been. Exactly. And they could have done so much more, I think. Like the fact that there were 3 women who were killed. The 2 that were featured were fictional. But there were 3 that were killed. They're buried at the American Cemetery in Normandy, France. Um, but they don't even get to the fact that they made it to France. They don't talk about how the women were received by the British citizens. They had women, some of these veterans who have talked about their time over there, talk about how they experienced less racism and a better reception and better treatment in England than they had
Also,
back in the States.
I was going to say, so I mentioned the video earlier, but from the History X channel who covered 6888, his video is the things the movie doesn't discuss.
Yeah.
Um, and part of the interview, and like I had tuned out for like a minute or two because I was doing stuff, but like it was playing in the background, and I just heard an interview with one of these veterans, and she's like, "Oh yes, the people of Birmingham loved us," and I'm like, "Hold on, what did you say?" And I had to like backtrack. It's like, "Oh, Birmingham, England." I'm like,
Yeah,
thing,
Alabama.
yeah, I was like, things I never thought I would hear is how amenable 1940s Birmingham, Alabama was. Like,
Well, we actually, when we had our discussion, we were working with a historian from Birmingham, England. It was like midnight. And I'm so grateful he called in, but I was like, we've been hearing, like, I've been trying to get more information. Like, what was Birmingham's, how did they treat the women when they came over? And he has such a wealth of knowledge. I'm going to be posting that video in a few weeks. We've been doing with the TikTok craziness. But it was so amazing because they're talking about, like, the women went to schools and talked to British school kids about being Americans. And it's like, I would have loved to have seen that featured in the film.
like them conducting public relations with the English.
I mean, it was a big experiment. They were the only African American unit to go overseas, but they were also one of very few women's units, period. So they were an experiment in a way twice over.
So I know we've kind of been critical of this film. What is a scene from this film, or what was the best part of this film for you?
I love that they included Charity Adams, that scene where she stands up to the colonel. That is word for word from her film. That scene where she goes, she ends it with "over my dead body" is a direct quote. And I thought that was so amazing because we talk about kind of those liberties, but it's like when they got it right, they did an amazing job with it. Like the fact that they took her book and worked into the screenplay and got that scene in there, I thought that was fantastic.
Jack, what was your favorite part of this film?
I need to think about this. I did like the ending where it talked about the real story and talked about their lives afterwards. Really liked that they included the interview with her towards the end, the real life person.
I think that was Lena Derricott.
Yeah, Lena Derricott, that's right. Forgot her name for an awkward moment. But yeah, and I like what they did with the place. put in a
Oh,
put in a
the
beauty
school.
parlor, like had them on schedules. You work days, you work nights, so we're functionally always productive.
For me, I don't think it was necessarily a particular scene, but I really liked the casting in this. Like there is some like I don't know if big name like obviously Oprah is a big name, but like there's some
Sam
very
Waterston.
yeah. I was not expecting Sam Waterston as FDR. That's not a role I would ever peg him for, but I thought he did a good job in that. So
Uh,
it's weird seeing District Attorney Jack McCoy as President Roosevelt, and then seeing Dean Norris or Asac Schrader as a general. Like,
Man, he keeps playing racist.
yeah, they need to typecast him as something else for once.
He's gonna get canceled
and,
on principle.
and also, it correct me if I'm wrong, but did his character exist?
The general,
Halt.
yes. And actually, if you watch, there's a scene. There's actually documentary footage from the school they were staying at, and you can actually see that pass and review scene that they did. And it's not because I think they kind of mixed up two military ceremonies into that pass and review for Without England. But if you look at the actual footage, you can see him standing on the platform. So I don't know if he was that bad in real life. I mean, I think the film showed, the really aggressive, the nasty remarks, the yelling. What the women faced in terms of like racism was a lot more subtle, a lot more passive
Mm-hmm.
aggressive. But I think that's one of those Hollywoodisms where they show them like getting, talked down. I mean, that happened too. But there was a lot of things that were, they didn't get the equipment they needed. They were segregated. They weren't allowed to do host and stuff. There's a lot of things that the movie just kind of, it would have been hard to touch on. But I do think that those like blatant, in your face, screaming matches, I think that was exaggerated for the film. He was still a military officer. He still would have had some amount of conduct and merit that would have been expected. But I'm sure he probably found other ways to put her down
Mm-hmm.
and impact what they were doing.
I also not really a big name actress, but I did love Lena's aunt. Like her aunt's personality is very much similar to my own grandmother's personality. So I don't know. For me, I just got a kick out of her. Plus, like, the comedic foil in a lot of those early scenes. So that was something I also appreciated.
I thought the casting was really well done. Um, I wish that Kerry Washington had used her platform a little bit more. She had this mass stage, and she could have done so much work in terms of advocating for the veterans and for women's military service. And I felt like she didn't take advantage of that as much as she could have. Like she was
As
not
far as
really
like
doing,
as far as like pushing the film.
not just, but well, she pushed the film, but she didn't really push the veterans.
Okay.
And her press tour, a lot of times she was always saying, "Oh, it's so inspiring. I'm so inspired by these veterans." It felt a lot like it was kind of like what she had been told to say, but it didn't really feel like she was doing much work to actually promote women's history. And I think she could have had incredible amounts of reach if she had done that and talked about. It seemed like she just kind of got spoon fed some of these phrases, and it was hard to feel like she actually did connect with the veterans and their support again.
Like doing what was required by the contract, essentially.
It seemed like she cared more about promoting the film than promoting the veterans. And I know that sounds really like wordplay and kind of like nuanced, but there were times where it's like, what is this movie about for you?
Well, I think a good comparison is like when they did the movie adaptation of Marcus Luttrell's book Lone Survivor. Like Mark Wahlberg did a ton of appearances with Marcus Luttrell, and like Marcus Luttrell is very big in the veteran and PTSD community since his service. So, is that kind of the involvement you were hoping for?
I think so. I mean, she did take a couple of photos with, some of the original veterans when they were still with us. She talks about, you get pictures of her at the museum and at Arlington, but that was kind of it. Like I know Gary Sinise is like the opposite example, like on the extreme spectrum. With his work with the military after playing a Vietnam veteran, but it feels like she just doesn't really know anything about veterans and didn't really do her best to. So that's maybe that's a big ask for a Hollywood actress, but it was kind of disappointing. We've got 600 followers. I would have loved to have, a chance to put our content about women's history forward to the kind of followers she's got.
Right. So, if you could make one change to this film, what would that be?
Hire a military advisor.
Yeah.
Show the women as the veterans that they were.
Jack, what would your change be?
Honestly, what she said, pretty succinct. May I suggest, and this may be controversial, but a different director?
What are you talking about? This was perfectly directed.
Okay.
It needs to be narrated by Tom Hanks.
Yes.
I don't think it's a World War II movie if Tom Hanks isn't involved.
I want Samuel L. Jackson in this film.
I think it would have been funny to pan over all of them sorting through their mail, and just Tom Hanks makes a cameo in the background, like the token white male in their unit. Also, another favorite scene of mine is when they decided to change tack, and they're like, "Whoa, you like crosswords, so you're piecing the broken letters together." And you're a hairstylist, so you do something. And then one girl unhelpfully says, "I was a mortician." Yes, thank you.
That will come in handy later.
Yeah.
After they disobey orders and drive over a UXB.
Yeah, you go scrape them off the road and just wait.
So what are you drinking tonight, Jack?
Well, since it is dry January, I am drinking a mellow yellow.
Excellent choice.
I love this soda.
I'm doing dry January because I've got a Coke. That was like iconic. When we're talking World War II tropes, you gotta have a Coke.
Hell That's yeah.
I'm a terrible person, so I'm not doing dry January.
Fuck you.
I'm doing a local brewery. It's Ska Brewing.
You are from Denver.
I am from.
He just dimed himself.
It's okay. A drink I get made fun of pretty frequently is from the Denver Brewing Company. I love Princess Yum Yum.
I don't think you can be from Denver if you don't have a microbrewery.
There's only 74 of them to choose from, so I have a True Blonde Ale from Ska Brewing. So that's my drink for the evening. But I think it's about time we put a rating on this film. Usually, we don't do stars because we think stars are boring. We usually choose some random item that we think best represents the film. I'll be honest, this is probably the first film that I don't have an idea for the object for our rating. So, Jack or Mel, if either of you have an idea, I'm all ears.
Historically inaccurate Jeeps.
Yes.
1950s Jeeps.
Yeah.
Korean War Jeeps with Marine Corps markings on them.
You know what? Since this film isn't going to be known for historical accuracy, I think it would have been funny if they just like pulled up in like a 2024 Suburban
2012 Dodge Charger.
or the 1999 Chevy Impala that everybody learned how to drive with.
I'm going to
Make it really weird.
I'm going to hit the restroom real quick. So, Jack and Mel, if you want to do your ratings, I'll be back in a moment.
Well, I think it's only right that our guests go first. Mel?
Yeah, I feel like we could even break that down into further categories, like how many inaccurate Jeeps for, accuracy. I think the director gets one. I don't know. I want to say 3. I'm going to say 3. It might be 4 if it wasn't for Tyler Perry.
Yeah. So the rating system I was going to go with is morticians. In the morticians in the mailroom. But I like 1950s Jeeps. And I'm going to be honest with you. I really couldn't have less to do with the military. I was never in the military. I don't have any immediate family members in the military. I'm a rancher. I grew up on a ranch, worked on one for 20 years. Sucked, but it's
Done it, I hear that.
So I don't really know dick about military, and whenever people say like, "Oh, that tank wouldn't have existed. It wasn't made for another 5 years," I'm like, well, it looked World War II to me, I guess, so I wouldn't know. But yeah, if I did know anything about the military, I feel like that would ruin every war movie for me ever, because I was like, oh, that's a Honda XD 32, not a 31. Literally unwatchable. But how hard is it to hire a consultant for these things? Like, you can't be over budget with them, right?
I mean, they had a WAC consultant, and I know her, she's a very capable historian, but from what I understand, she said they didn't take much of her advice. So,
and I guess that kind of ties back into your rating with the whole, Tyler Perry thing. I think he likes to play fast and loose with these kind of things, which, given his net worth being higher than you'd think, there's a reason for it, but one that I can't justify. But to cut to the chase, since our compatriot is back, I think I'm going to give this one two 1950s Jeep, and one of them is parked over a UXB. So a 2.5.
2 3/4. The other half's on the wall somewhere.
So, 2.5, 3/4 from Jack. Mel, would you give this?
I said 3. I should have had him in for Tyler Perry at the one.
Fair enough. Like I said, this is a film that, like, it starts off very corny and cliche. There's a lot of potential with this film that I think was missed on.
Yeah.
That being said, I appreciate it when films talk about stuff that I haven't seen before. Because, like, how many Normandy films are there? How many submarine films are there? And don't get me wrong, I love all of those, especially submarine films. But you can tell those stories only so many times in so many ways. As far as this particular media goes, this is a brand new and fresh story. And it, like we talked about, it's kind of invigorating a new section of the history space. And as unfortunate as it is, like, I think a big part of that is due to the fact that our World War II veteran population is dwindling and aging, and we will not have them much longer. Which I appreciate the fact that there are so many people putting effort into recording the stories of the individuals who are left, which I think plays a part into films like this coming out. Because,
Right.
In the 70s and 80s, a large portion of the World War II population is still around, and everybody's like, hell yeah, let's storm the beaches of Normandy. And nowadays, our original source material is not nearly there. I read a few reviews of this after I watched the movie, and I either see reviews that are like, this is an amazing film.
Or it's a dumpster fire.
Correct.
Yes.
I don't think it's either. And I don't think it's fair to. I saw one guy review it and he said this is the most Netflix film Netflix has ever made. And I feel like that's an apt description, but I don't think that necessarily makes it bad. So
One review I saw that I didn't like was when they kept saying this movie makes people think women actually fought in World War II and all they did was sword mail. And I'm like, I feel like that's where the film was not so successful, and that it didn't emphasize how important sorting the mail was, and that military duty is military duty no matter what you do.
right.
And seeing reviews where people are like, it's misleading, it's a terrible movie, it's woke garbage, it's forcing us to think that women are truly military. Those reviews are the ones that I got really upset by. But I saw a few like that.
No, I think if you wore the uniform, and especially like World War II was a time frame where it was an all out effort. If you were wearing a uniform, then you were doing like you were working in factories, like everything was the war 24/7. So I think that's very disingenuous to say something like that.
I think the reviews just show how much the film missed the mark in so many ways that people didn't quite. People were just like, they love the hidden history, and they love the idea of these heroes, and they basically didn't care how the movie was because they're like, it's an important story. And then you get the reviews where people are like hung up on like the V1 rocket, and the fact that they keep feel like this is propaganda.
Right. So I think I'm going to be the most generous here because I'll say it, I actually enjoyed this movie despite the flaws and despite the things that could have been done better and the things I wish that were in it. I think it's a movie worth watching, and I I enjoyed it. So I'm going to give it three 1950s Jeeps, and the fourth Jeep is going to be a Jeep that was parked on Colfax Avenue in Denver. So it's just the frame because like the tires were taken off of it and it's on cinder blocks and shit. So like a 3 1/4.
I think everyone needs to watch the movie and then go do some further reading. I think they need to know that this film is not going to tell them the whole story. It shouldn't. There's so many books and documentaries, but I think it's a good film to start with. It's kind of a gateway drug for World War II.
So Jack, what does Rotten Tomatoes give this?
Let's see. 52% on the tomometer and 73% on the popcorn meter, aka this users.
So the average viewer dug this film, but the critics were not that big a fan.
That's precise.
I don't think I disagree. I think I would lean more towards the viewer rating than the critic rating.
No, and I think that, if you don't know much about World War II history, it's a good starting point. If you know a lot about World War II history, you're going to lose your mind a little bit. But I do think it's important. I think it belongs in schools. I'm really excited that we're able to post this screening. I think it is so important, but it cannot be a standalone resource. So, it's like Band of Brothers, people get into history because they watch a documentary or they watch Band of Brothers and they want to know more. So I think what's cool about this film is that people starting to put more out there. So the film is no longer kind of on an island and solely responsible for sharing its history.
Man,
That's where I was getting problematic.
man, I wish I could read.
Well, it's a good thing you work with audiobooks.
It's true. I listen to a lot of audiobooks. And yes,
I
what?
don't know if you've ascertained this from episodes that you have heard from us, but Jack works for the state library in South Dakota
For the
with their
library,
blind program.
library for the blind and print disabled. So I like to tell people I help blind people. The adjective, not the verb.
I've actually been to that library.
You have?
I was a Civil War reenactor. There was something that we had to go find information.
Ah.
Maybe not the blind library, but we were in the South Dakota library.
Tubular. How long ago was that?
2016, we were looking for information on Custer.
Ah.
He was becoming an asshole.
He doesn't have a stellar reputation in South Dakota.
No.
He does not. I actually got to do the roundup when I was living up there, which was probably like my top 5 reenactor moments. That was pretty surreal. Totally different time period.
Different time.
Whenever I want to piss Jack off, I'll just randomly in the middle of the day just text him like Custer did nothing wrong.
You pot stirring son of a bitch.
My favorite thing is that Custer brought his own journalist to make sure he got press. He was like the original TikTok influencer today.
I got attacked by Indians. No clickbait. Final video.
Yeah, we've been dealing with the TikTok fallout all day, and then everything to YouTube, and it came back. What was that about?
It's okay. We deactivated our account, but everything I post to TikTok is already on our YouTube in the reels or the shorts. So when TikTok shut down, it wasn't that big of a deal for us. It was annoying reactivating the account though.
It's been a fun day.
But speaking of
questions for me though, or
this, our final question, speaking of social media, if you have any upcoming projects or any social media pages you'd like folks to know about, the floor is yours.
well, in terms of that kind of project, I mean, we do about 2 or 3 public events a month. We're based out of New England. So if you follow our social media, we do post all of our public events. We've got a event at Fort Devens, which was actually home to a strike. 4 African American blacks went on strike in a court martial. As I'll be at Fort Devens on the 15th of February talking about that. In terms of other good pages for 6 AAA history, there's 2 really good groups we've been working with. One is Remembering the 6 AAA in Birmingham, and then there's another one that is Honor the 6 AAA. They've been writing profiles of all the veterans. So that's a good page to follow. And then Women at War is another page based out of England. And they've been posting a lot about the 6 AAA, and they're meticulous in the research of all of them. So there's going to be a lot of content coming out about these women. And those are 3 pages I recommend. There's also the 6 AAA World War II, which is run by the original woman who got the Congressional Gold Medal. So those 4 groups are fantastic. You understand that?
And then I know for your Instagram page is 350 girls, and it's the numbers 350. Is it the same for other places that people can find you?
On Facebook, we are 350 OH spelled out and then girls.
Okay.
At Instagram, we are 350 girls. We're usually, if you put 350 girls into Google, you'll get our website, which then has all of our social medias at the bottom.
Great. Jack, do you have anything else?
I donut.
All right, Mel, it has been great having you with us. If you enjoyed this episode, please go and follow Mel at her accounts. Please leave a review of this episode. The stars do matter. If you want additional content from us, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and apparently TikTok still. Until next time, I've been John.
And I'm Jack.
And Mel, it's been great having you with us.
Thanks for having me. I've been enjoying talking about this movie, so appreciate the opportunity.
Hell yeah. We were
Until
great.
next time, Jack.
What? Oh,
Do your thing.
fine. Bye.